Good morning, Washington. Good afternoon, Kiev. My name is Melinda Herring, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. We're really excited to host this panel today, Ready for Reform, Upholding the Rule of Law in Ukraine. We've gathered 6 outstanding people who are trying to change the rule of law in Ukraine and bring justice to the country. We're joined today by Artem Sitnik, the director of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, or NABO. Also joined by Daniel Bilak, senior counselor at Kinsler and former chief investment advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine. We're joined by Sergei Anushis, deputy chair of the Rada's Law Enforcement Committee. Welcome, Sergei. This is your first time at the Atlantic Council. Thrilled to have you. Also joined by Alexander Novikov, chair of the National Agency for the Prevention of Corruption. Welcome, Alexander. We're also joined by Anastasia Rodina, chair of the Rada's Anti-Corruption Committee and a good friend of the Atlantic Council. And last but not least is Ruslan Rybashapka, the former general prosecutor of Ukraine and also a good friend of the Atlantic Council. Now, we have 6 wonderful speakers and only 60 minutes. So we need to be very efficient in how we use our time. The first 10 minutes of our conversation will be with Artem Sitnik, and it will be in a mix of English and Russian. Then we will move to a panel discussion with our 5 panelists, and then we invite you, the audience, to join in. Artem, let's turn to you. Welcome. It's wonderful to see you. I have lost count of how many times you have almost been fired. I know you're under attack again. Why and how serious is the attack?
Добрий день всім. Дякую за запрошення, за можливість продискутувати з поважними колегами, з якими ми дуже багато разом зробили.
Good day. Thank you for inviting me and for this opportunity to discuss things with the colleagues with whom I respect very much and with whom we have done so much already.
Хтось, на жаль, був звільнений, хтось в процесі звільнення. І це, мабуть, є індикатором того, що люди, які присутні тут, роблять це правильно.
Someone has already been fired, someone is in the process of getting fired, and this is an indicator or this is a sign that the people who are present here are doing something right.
Пан Новіков тільки починає відчувати, що таке процес нескінченного звільнення з посади за правильні дії.
Mr. Novikov is just beginning to feel on his feel himself what the process of being constantly under threat of firing feels like.
Загроза звільнення нависає над керівництвом НАБУ, починаючи з 2016 року, і вона не припинялась ні на секунду.
The threat of being fired has been hanging over the NABO since 2016, and it has stayed that way non-stop since then.
Я думаю, це припиниться тоді, коли Україна війде в десятку країн в рейтингу Transparency International. Але, мабуть, це, на жаль, буде не скоро.
I think that this pressure will stop when Ukraine will join the top 10 of the countries who are in the top 10 of the Transparency International rating, but this is not something that will happen too soon.
Єдиною запорукою протидії цим нескінченним атакам це три прості речі. Це запит на реальну боротьбу з корупцією, який не слабне після Революції Гідності.
So the only way or the 3 main factors that keep the fight against corruption going is first is the demand in the society for the real fight against corruption.
Друге, це робота детективів максимально відповідності до законодавства, що не дає можливості якимось чином тиснути на антикорупційне бюро.
The second thing is that the NABO detectives need to work and to conduct all their investigations in accordance with the law, which allows them to not come under pressure for breaking the law or for being outside of some bounds.
Ну і третє, це підтримка наших міжнародних партнерів, які були завжди поруч, і завдяки їх підтримці нам вдавалось до сьогоднішнього дня витримувати ці атаки і рухати антикорупційну реформу вперед.
And the third factor is the support of our international partners, thanks to whom we were able to withstand this pressure and to move forward the reform.
Wonderful, thank you. Artem, I have a serious question for you. Is the fight to establish the rule of law in Ukraine actually winnable? I know you're going to smile and think this is not a serious question, but you've been in office for several years now, and not many corrupt people are behind bars. Is it winnable, and how long is it going to take?
Ну, це є одною з основних проблем, тому що суспільство чекало миттєвого результату від роботи не тільки антикорупційного бюро, а взагалі правоохоронних органів, якщо ми говоримо про боротьбу з корупцією.
Well, this is one of the main problems because the society has been expecting an instant win over corruption, and not just from us, but from all law enforcement agencies.
Але всі успішні антикорупційні органи за кордоном, вони проходили ще більш довший шлях до того, коли починали показувати певні результати. Тому ми рухаємося дуже швидко, якщо порівняти з досвідом інших країн.
But all the successful anti-corruption agencies in other countries have taken much longer than us in actually showing a tangible success. So we are moving forward at a faster pace.
І головне, незважаючи на дуже тривалу, виснажливу боротьбу за створення антикорупційного суду, цей суд створений, і я не буду довго проводити приклади, але вже є 8-й суддя, який був викритий НАБУ при одержанні неправомірної вигоди, який отримав реальний термін покарання. І вироків з кожний тиждень мінімум один вирок з реальним сроком покарання з'являється. Це дуже добра тенденція, яка з іншого боку лякає істеблішмент політичний, тому і знову ж таки спроби зупинити це все, вони кожен день відбуваються і продовжуються.
But despite this long-term and very exhausting fight for the creation of the Anti-Corruption Court of Ukraine, this court has been created, and we have the 8th judge who has been uncovered as someone who has taken a bribe, and he has gotten a real sentence with a real imprisonment term. And every week, such new sentences with real imprisonment terms are popping up. This is a good tendency, which actually scares the establishment. But this will keep on.
У 2020 році було відшкодовано збитків більш ніж 1 мільярд 100 мільйонів гривень, і це тільки початок, тому, незважаючи на всі спроби це все зупинити, ми рухаємося вперед.
So in 2020, we have returned to the budget over 1 billion 100 million hryvnias, and this is only the beginning. We are moving forward on this.
Wonderful. Thanks for the response. NABO has to work hand in hand with other law enforcement bodies in Ukraine. How are things going at NABO since Irina Venediktova became general prosecutor? She claims that she got some results on some of the Kolomoisky cases while NABO failed. Is she a help or a hindrance towards judicial reform in Ukraine?
Насправді, НАБУ все ж таки, як показала практика, НАБУ в основному змушено покладатися тільки на свої сили.
Well, actually, our experience shows that NABU has no one to count on but itself.
Два фактори, які дуже сильно вплинули на роботу НАБУ, негативно вплинули. Це, я вважаю, абсолютно політичне звільнення генерального прокурора Рябошапки і те, що зараз антикорупційна прокуратура не має очільника.
And there are two factors that have impacted the work of the NABO in a negative sense. The first one was the firing of the General Prosecutor Ruslan Rabushapka. This was a political firing. And the second is the fact that we right now do not have a head of the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office.
Тому дуже багато рішень ми, на жаль, змушені погоджувати із Офісом Генерального прокурора, і це створює додаткові проблеми в нашій роботі. Тому я дуже сподіваюся, що той конкурс, який вже майже рік триває з обрання керівника САП, він закінчиться успішно, і через прозору процедуру буде відібрана дійсно достойна людина, яка ці проблеми усунуть і буде працювати разом з нами.
In many things we have to rely on and get approval from the Prosecutor General's office, which creates additional problems for us. So I hope that the competition to appoint the head of the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's office will be successful, and through this transparent competition, a person will be appointed with whom we will be able to work fruitfully.
Що стосується справи Приватбанка, тут це така добра традиція України, коли в перемоги дуже багато батьків, а у поразка завжди сирота.
Well, regarding the case of the Privatbank, Ukraine has such a great tradition that victory has many fathers, and a loss or a defeat is always a child with a parentless child.
Я можу сказати і підтвердити мої слова присутній тут Руслан про те, що справа Приватбанка з'явилася в НАБУ в повному обсязі в зв'язку з тим, що дійсно всі правоохоронні органи були максимально заангажовані проти позитивного розслідування цієї справи. І це було непросте рішення для Генерального прокурора, і це було однією з основних причин для звільнення Генерального прокурора Рябошапки. І саме зібрані матеріали стали підставою для того, щоб все ж таки вже давно підготовлені підозри були нарешті погоджені.
Within this case, within the process of investigating the Privatbank case, the fact that this case ended up with the NABO was because all of the law enforcement agencies were engaged in an attempt to undermine it. So the result was that this was one of the reasons for the firing of Ruslan Rabushapka, but the materials and the evidence that had been gathered has given rise to a number of to the accusations, to the charges that could be filed.
Ну і весь період розслідування він супроводжувався тим, що депутати з орбіти бенефіціара, колишнього бенефіціара цього банку подавали законопроекти, які були скеровані на послаблення антикорупційної системи, подавали заяви до Конституційного суду, який виніс дуже скандальні рішення, і я думаю, про це ще сьогодні згадають інші спікери, які збирали підписи за мою відставку. Тобто весь процес постійно супроводжувався політичним тиском, але знову ж таки ми довели, що створена система, вона здатна протидіяти цим тискам, і результат є, і ми на ньому не збираємося зупинятися.
The whole time that the investigation has been going on, the members of parliament from the circle of the former beneficiary of Privatbank were always attempting to influence the process. They were submitting bills that were aiming to weaken the anti-corruption system. They have managed to get the Constitutional Court of Ukraine to adopt the decision. That has been a great scandal, and I'm sure that someone from the guests of this discussion will mention this. They have been gathering signatures for my dismissal, but despite all of this pressure, all of this political pressure, the anti-corruption system has been able to withstand it. So we are keeping the work up.
Thank you. Artem, I have one last question for you. Your position ends in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. What advice do you have for your successor?
Дві короткі поради. Якщо вас не намагаються звільнити, значить ви щось робите не так.
So two short advices. The first one is if no one is trying to fire you, then you are doing something wrong.
І друге, якщо хтось думає, що прийшовши в НАБУ, він зможе через конвільно якимось чином ламати детективів і примушувати їх робити щось незаконне, то він глибоко помиляється. Тому я все ж таки сподіваюся, що як і в САПі, так і в НАБУ через процедуру прозорого відкритого конкурсу прийде людина, яка не буде намагатися знищувати те, що створювалось дуже важко, а все ж таки буде намагатися це все примножувати і рухати вперед.
And the second advice is if you are trying to come to this position with the idea that you will be able to get the detectives of the NABO bend over backwards and do something unlawful, you are greatly mistaken. And I hope that both the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office and the NABO will get new directors, new heads through the process of a transparent competition, and that these people will keep up the good work that we've been doing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Artem, for joining us. I'm going to move to the rest of the panel. Please stay with us. After the panel discussion concludes, I want to give you a chance to respond. Thank you so much, Miroslava. Wonderful work, both of you. Dan Bilak, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. You have a big picture view. You're an attorney and you were an advisor to the Prime Minister on investment. You chaired Ukraine Invest, the national investment promotion agency from 2018 to 2020. In your experience, how concerned were potential investors about the rule of law in Ukraine? And a second question, do you have any good estimates on how much additional investment or economic growth such reforms could unlock? Over to you, Dan.
Thanks very much, Melinda. Actually, it was 2016 to 2020. So it's
apologies. Sorry about
I've got
that.
the scars to show. No, it's just it shows that I came in to do it for a year, and it was over 3 years, because I think the nature of this job and the nature of the discussion we're having today is such that it doesn't lend itself to easy and facile treatment. Your question is a good one. I mean, rule of law is without a doubt the single most important issue that investors want to feel comfortable about. When you come from Europe or Canada or the United States to a country that says they're a democratic European nation, you want to feel like you're in a country that feels, touches, smells like a European democratic nation. I think that the problem has been, and I think that I don't like to talk about reform. I want to talk about, I generally talk about transformation, because I think context here is very important. This is a discussion that I tried to have with investors, is that Ukraine, when it became independent, had no institutions of democratic governance, zero. The institutions are the ones that people are trying to reform now, that say, why can't you reform? Why can't you reform? They were the basis of the Soviet state, the Prokuratura, the KGB, and the judiciary. This were the pillars of Soviet power. And to somehow say that you're just going to change these, why don't you reform these tomorrow, is hugely improper. And what happens when you have the collapse of a system like that is you leave an enormous space, a vacuum. And who fills that space? The special interest groups. They grab the assets of the nation. They spontaneously or otherwise privatize them. They become very powerful, and that's essentially what you get is state capture. And that's what we had until 2015. We actually only started to build Ukraine from 2015 onwards. And the fact that we have succeeded to have this kind of a conversation is phenomenally important. And I think that context should not be lost on people. because the rule of law has developed in Western societies over hundreds of years, generations at best. And here, in the space of what is it now, 5-6 years, you have people who've been appointed since 2015, 2016, some people who were appointed that are no longer there. But the point is that that anti-corruption architecture has been put into place, and it has moved forward. And it's been put into place not because the government wanted it, it was put into place because the people wanted it. The Ukrainian people wanted it, and it was put into place and has survived because Ukraine has had the support of its external partners who understand the importance of Ukraine to their own security. And so in this geopolitical context, it also has an investment aspect to it. You have to, fighting corruption is not hard. You shine light in dark corners. Basically, you can't have corruption if you're not hiding something, right? And this anti-corruption architecture that was built up, NABO, the anti-corruption court, the people in the Procuratura, that a lot has been done to change it. The NAZK, the National Anti-Corruption Corruption Prevention Organization, and the reform of the Supreme Court. This is now the basis of a new system of democratic governance and public accountability in Ukraine. And that's what investors want to see. They want to know that when they go to the police are going to be on their side. They're going to fight for their corner. Mr. Sitnik and I had many interactions when I was head of Ukraine Invest to help investors deal with corruption in various parts of the country. This gives people a feeling of comfort. We are not unique in corruption. This notion of Ukraine as some sort of super corrupt outlier in the region is nonsense. If you look at some of our neighbors who have entered the EU, their problems with corruption have not gone away as a result of that. And in some cases, their rule of law credentials have been backsliding. In many cases, in many respects, Ukraine is a democratic leader. And, I think one of the biggest transformations that has taken place is in the court system at the Supreme Court level. Last year, the Supreme Court heard 93,000 cases. 93,000 cases. That's almost 300,000 cases since 2018 when it was rebooted. Out of those cases, there have been virtually, I've heard none that have been questioned on the basis of corruption. Full disclosure, my wife was selected as a Supreme Court judge in 2019 in the second round. But for me, that was a test. Can somebody who comes from academia apply, go through a rigorous selection process and become a judge? I was very skeptical, to be honest with you, because the way this system had been so compromised up to the Revolution of Dignity that nobody thought that it could be reformed. And she got in. To me, that was a huge signal that something was changing. And it's not.
Let me interrupt you there. This is great context, but let me ask you if this beautiful system that you're describing, and I agree that it's very impressive, is working, then why was FDI so low last year? I believe it was 0.2%.
Look, we have to understand, I come back to the issue of context. Ukraine, this is a battle. Okay, this is not a normal country in Eastern Europe that has had a tradition of democracy like many of our neighbors have, with their own institutions. Ukraine never had its own parliament, never had its own judiciary, never had its own government. And we're building this from scratch, right? We have a lot of people that want to capture that process. They're very powerful. Many of them are tied to a neighbor to the north. This fight against corruption is as important and very much tied to the fight that goes on in the Donbass and in the Crimea. So this is a battle. And what Artem was talking about just now is a sign of that. What happened to Ruslan is a sign of that. The issues that Mr. Novikov has to deal with repeatedly is a sign of that. But it's also a sign that the other side is not winning. The scope for corrupt activity, the scope for controlling huge swaths of public administration, the judiciary, and government have been narrowed substantially. Doesn't mean it's going to go away. It doesn't mean it's going to go away soon. But, you know, you had Romania where the government was being run by a gangster who was in prison.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they solved that problem, but we need that help. And this is why I think that this is a really key point that Mr. Sitnik just made. The fundamental, in my view, in my own view, and this is a sign to investors that things are, because this is what we all understand. We understand open, transparent, inclusive competition for public positions. And we just had an opinion of the Venice Commission, of the Council of Europe, just came out this week on the Constitutional Court, but it affects the Constitutional Court, it affects the Higher Judicial Council, it affects the selection of judges at the lower and appeal courts, it affects the selection of heads of the SBU and the Special Prosecutor's Office. We need to have that open, transparent, competitive process. I would not be afraid of having foreigners and civilians involved. I don't know what the composition is. I don't really care. I think that they need to be involved because that doesn't take away from Ukraine's sovereignty. At this stage, in a nation-building context, it actually strengthens Ukraine's sovereignty. And
wonderful. Let's leave it there, Dan. Thank you so much. That was such helpful context. That was wonderful. I want to bring Alexander Novikov in. Dan just mentioned that you run the National Agency for the Prevention of Corruption, NAPC in English, which is one of Ukraine's many anti-corruption institutions. NAPC is meant to verify the asset declarations for public servants. This past fall, the Constitutional Court significantly watered down the law on asset declarations for public servants, which you and your office worked very hard to strengthen. Do we need a new approach to the Constitutional Court? Is the right approach to fire all of the judges and start over with a transparent process? Go ahead, Alexander.
Thank you. We are the only institution that works on the side of corruption prevention in Ukraine. We understand the importance of prosecution of corruption in Ukraine, especially in high-profile cases. But what we also need is, firstly, a coordinated anti-corruption policy. And it is our function to suggest the government the overarching anti-corruption strategy and coordinate the efforts in its implementation. I think that it is the most important function of my agency, not the asset declaration, but the anti-corruption strategy. Because with the help of anti-corruption strategy, we can defend the NABO, the SAPO, and the all good institutions that we have in Ukraine that we already have built in Ukraine. We also need to have tools to ensure transparency in the public sector. And our agency, as I said before, is responsible for maintaining a database of asset declarations and checks these declarations. We also provide the guidance and check whether public servants follow their conflict of interest regulations, whether the system of reporting corruption by whistleblowers is up and running, whether public bodies implement anti-corruption plans for each public body. And the other important point is that long before our other specialized anti-corruption bodies initiate the long and costly pretrial investigations of corruption cases, we are able to separate and ban from public service those officials who are corrupted. We appeal to court to issue administrative penalties for comparatively minor administrative offenses, such as declaring false information in asset declaration, fail to manage the situation of conflict of interest. And last but not least, we play an important role in ensuring transparency of financial reports of political parties. So as you see, our task is to make sure that Ukrainian system of public administration as a whole gradually accepting higher standards of integrity. If we do our job right, with the time, neither NABO, SAPO, or High Anti-Corruption Court of Ukraine would have no work to do. So it is the final point of our anti-corruption strategy. What about a new approach to the Constitutional Court? I think that this question is more political rather than judicial. And as you can see in this Saturday, the president adopt the new approach to the Constitutional Court. We hope that Rada fix the law that was voted so quickly, and we will have the imprisonment for the false declaring. Now, the law that we have is not good for prevention corruption without these mechanisms. That's all, and I can answer your questions.
Sure. I have one other question for you. Thank you, Alexander. That was a really great presentation. So I know there's a controversy with the public financing of political parties now, and your organization found some problems on the books. Why is the Rada trying to take away some of the powers of your organization to audit public financing of political parties? And how big of a deal is this?
Now it is a very important issue for us. One of the challenges we face is draft law 5253, registered in Verkhovna Rada. This draft law is related to political finance. In case it is adopted, the NACP will be able to spot the false data in the reports of political parties, yet this false data cannot serve a ground for stopping the state funding of political parties. The draft law was registered by management of all fractions after the NACP suspended the state finance for 3 parliamentary parties, Batkivshina, Golos, and Sluga Narodu. Today, we consider the adoption of this draft law as one of the treats for our efficiency and independence. And what is the longest cause why it is important? Because the political system and the transparent and honest political parties is the most important thing for all our political system and for all other tools and mechanisms of anti-corruption in Ukraine.
Thank you, Alexander. That issue is not very well understood in the West, so I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. Thank you so much. Nastya, I'd like to move to you. President Zelenskyy has recently increased the pressure on corrupt actors like Viktor Medvedchuk and Ihor Kolomoisky. Are you and your committee in dialogue with the Zelenskyy administration about how to sanction and prosecute prominent figures for corruption? What other avenues might your committee explore to crack down on corruption?
First of all, let me please start with saying that I hugely support this recent effort to tackle Russian-funded oligarchs and to tackle Mr. Kolomoisky. In my understanding, in the spirit of the rule of law, proper reaction would be quick, uninfluenced investigation on the matter by Anti-Corruption Bureau, and then a fair proceeding in the court. This is what we expect to happen, and we are very glad to say and to see that notification of suspicion in these cases have been filed and cases are moving on. Hope to see them in the court soon. Recently, I and colleagues also stepped in with a draft law legal initiative to synchronize legal consequences of Ukrainian, US, and EU sanctions. To describe it very briefly, what we propose is in case when, for example, US sanction prohibits US banks from dealing with sanctioned individuals, same would be advisable to happen in Ukraine. If there are Ukrainian sanctions against some individuals, again, Ukrainian banks should be literally prohibited with from dealing with these individuals. Why? Because the nature of sanctions is not to punish, but to prevent. And key in preventing or breaking vicious circle of economic ties between sanctioned officials and other actors would be breaking financial ties between them. That's important in my opinion.
Wonderful. Anastasia, I hope you'll write up that argument for Ukraine Alert. That's a really important issue, and we'd love to highlight that. And Alexander, I hope that you'll write an article about your new strategy. Maybe you and Nastia can do it together. I leave it to you to figure it out. We don't know enough about your new strategy, and we'd love to hear more about it. Sergey, I want to turn to you. You are on the Law Enforcement Committee in the Rada, and again, welcome to the Atlantic Council. Really happy to have you here. Why did you submit an amendment that enables NABO proceedings to be transferred to the security services of Ukraine upon the decision of the prosecutor general if the case is considered a threat to national security? Doesn't this pose a great threat to NABO, especially since the current prosecutor general is not a reformer and not known for her independence? And for example, Prosecutor General Venediktova recently transferred NABO's proceedings against the deputy head of the president's office, Taranov, to the SBU, and the case was buried. What was your thinking behind this amendment?
First of all, I would like to congratulate all participants and thank the organizers for invitation. This is really first time with the Atlantic Council, and thank you for your questions. First of all, I think we are not talking about personality if we're talking about general prosecution, but we should think about institutional capacity of the general prosecution is the head of judiciary, and order of general prosecution has the right in difficult exceptional situation to determine the jurisdictional criminal cases. First of all, I want to highlight it to participants that this it was initiated by the Secret Service and NABO. It was not initiated from our committee. In addition, the bill provides for a minimum of 3 refuses for the following cases. First, the right to transfer criminal cases from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau is not assigned to the Secret Service of Ukraine by any processional manager, but only the general prosecution or acting general prosecution can do that. Second, such a decision on the transfer of criminal proceeding may be taken by prosecutor general only, I stress, only with the written concern of the deputy prosecutor general, the head of specialized anti-corruption prosecution office. And third, not every criminal case can be transferred from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau to the Security Service of Ukraine, but only such an offense that the posted a threat of the state security of Ukraine. So if you ask me about this draft law, it's draft law was filed together the main law which we want to reform the Secret Service of Ukraine. And I want to tell you once again that no one of previous president of Ukraine could decide on this reform, and it was only Volodymyr Zelenskyy who took the decision step in creating a new special service. Currently, the new draft law of Secret Service was supported by Parliament in first hearing. Of course, the reform process is not going as fast as we would like, including due to resistance from the system itself. I hope that in the near future we will launch one of the basic reform. At another hand, I was highlighted that this draft law can provide for the abolition of the SBU or the function of combating economic crimes and corruption, and the abolition of the SBU economic department. And this is the main thing of this draft law.
Thank you so much, Sergey. Yeah, there's a lot to like in the bill, and I understand it's passed the first reading, and there's now more than 2,000 amendments. And I think the Atlantic Council will probably have a panel just on the SBU reform bill because it's quite complicated. And we look forward to welcoming you back to discuss it in more detail. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, it's very important to receive the recommendation from your side, and I want to thank you for American partners for cooperation and support in promotion reform in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. Really appreciate that, and good luck with the SBU bill. It's over time, and we are so delighted that it's finally moving. So well done, Ruslan. Thank you so much for being patient. I'd like to bring you into the conversation. You've heard from Sergey and Anastasia about the Rada's legislative activities. From your perspective, is the Rada doing enough to combat corruption? And if you'd like to comment on the pressure against Artem Sitnik, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how the West and reformers in Ukraine can prevent further rollback of post-Maidan anti-corruption programs. Your turn, Ruslan.
Yeah, thank you, Melinda. Thank you for inviting me to speak on such a distinguished meeting. I would like to start with the first part of questions regarding the parliamentary activities on anti-corruption. It's quite easy to compare two different parliaments. First was acting during the so-called Turbo regime era, and as I remember that our foreign colleagues, partners sometimes were criticizing us for being too quick in reforming the country. But then something has changed with the parliament, and we could not see any good, strong moves from the parliament towards reform in Ukraine, particularly in anti-corruption sphere. I just like to remind that in a couple of months during the September and December in 2019, the parliament managed to adopt several laws and to start several reforms, like prosecutor general office reform, the anti-corruption reform. In a couple of months, we re-established the criminal liability for list enrichment. We also managed to reset the National Agency on Corruption Prevention. We also adopted a new legislation on whistleblower protection, and some other reforms also has been started. But then something changed with the parliament. Perhaps he knows more about this, what's happened. And the next parliament was like more attacking the anti-corruption infrastructure. We can see several attacks against the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and particularly against Artem Sitnik as a head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. We also see attempts to control the selection procedure on appointment the head of the specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office. We know very well that the anti-corruption prosecutor is like a key person in anti-corruption infrastructure. Then it looks like sometimes our anti-corruption, our parliament is not like in a anti-corruption coalition, because sometimes there is my impression that the parliament is acting against those anti-corruption bodies which are really fighting against corruption. So what could happen in terms of improving the situation? I think that the key issue is like only the political will. So if this person or persons who are bearer of the political will, they have real wish to change the country, to move forward with reform, so nothing could stop him. And the same is connected, also linked to the parliament. If the president has a political will to move forward with the reforms, so then the parliament will be a participant of anti-corruption coalition, but not like a body which is attacking or trying to control the anti-corruption prosecutor's office or anti-corruption bodies. So I just would like to stress that the key issue, which is extremely important now, is to have such kind of political will to move forward with reforms.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ruslan. And Nastya, I wanted to ask you another question. We've talked a lot about the pressure on to remove Artem Sitnik. Can you tell us any more about the recent discussions in the Rada to amend the constitution to allow the president to fire not only Artem, but also the director of the State Bureau of Investigation, the SBI? And
Thank you very much for your question. Let me first step back and probably say 2 words about why we are introducing legal amendments as to appointment of NABO director. As a result of decision of the Constitutional Court, now we are in a situation when there is no procedure to appoint NABO director, and term in office of Mr. Sitnik is running out in April next year. So before that, we actually have to pass a law providing for a proper new procedure for selection of the head of Anti-Corruption Bureau. Now there are 2 options on our table. First one is to amend the constitution and provide, for example, that the president, upon consent from the parliament, has a legal right to appoint NABO director. Same applies to Director of State Bureau of Investigations. A respective draft law has been sent for legal expertise of the Constitutional Court. For me, the most important provision of this draft law is that no longer it offers an opportunity for the president or the parliament political elites to make any deals as to who may be next head of Anti-Corruption Bureau. Instead, the draft law clearly says that first step of the process would be competition. For me, this is the most important element. If provision on competition is still there, I think it's absolutely fine to have Mr. President, upon consent from the Parliament, appointing head of Anti-Corruption Bureau or head of State Bureau of Investigations. If we choose not to amend the constitution, our only opportunity would be to provide that the Cabinet of Ministers appoints next head of Anti-Corruption Bureau. Unfortunately, it has happened politically so that part of this discussion on how to appoint next head of Anti-Corruption Bureau, traditionally, the issue of firing current head of Anti-Corruption Bureau popped up. My position here is very simple. It's not the question of personality. It's the question of first abiding the law, and second of sending a message to next head of Anti-Corruption Bureau, the question you asked to Mr. Sitnik. I think it is very, very important for us to make sure we abide the law and do not make any steps in the direction of dismissing current NABO director in situation not prescribed by the law, because by doing that, we send a message to next NABO director that he would not be protected, that he might be influenced by vested interests, by oligarchs, by whomever else. By this, we might be sending a message to people interested in running for the competition for next NABO director that, well, independent people are not welcome. So in my understanding, it is very important to make sure we, again, abide the law and make no steps in direction on unlawful dismissal for the sake of independence, of, may say, next NABO director, for the sake of next 7 years of NABO operation.
Thank you, Nastya. Artem, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation and give you a chance to respond to the panel discussion. Any reflections or any responses to anything that anyone said? Or any other thoughts you'd like to mention?
Ну, є слово вдячності за те, що люди глибоко розуміють проблематику, яка зараз існує в сфері антикорупції. І я дуже радий, що є дуже багато людей, які підтримують і які розуміють, перед якими викликами зараз ми стоїмо. І є ціла група однодумців, яка все ж таки вважає за необхідне зберегти незалежність антикорупційної системи і рухати її вперед.
Well, I would like to just express my gratitude for the fact that there are people who have a deep understanding of the scope of the problems that the anti-corruption infrastructure in Ukraine is facing, the people who support us and who understand the challenges that we are facing, and that we have a group of like-minded people who help us move forward.
Wonderful. Artem, there's a specific question for you from Osta Byarish from Voice of America. He wants to know, NABO just announced that Alexander Dubilet, the former head of the board of Privat Bank, was wanted. Do you have any information about Dubilet? Is he still in Ukraine? And do you plan to detain him soon?
Дубілет. Що йому пред'явили, значить, звинувачення, і чи плануєте ви його затримувати, чи буде якісь дії щодо нього?
На жаль, термін погодження підозри був дуже тривалий, і коли вже були готові документи щодо оголошення підозр, більшість підозрюваних була на території України.
Коли вже були готові, вони ще були, да? Yeah. So unfortunately, it took too long to get the charge papers, the papers with which the accused is being charged, to get them approved. And while we were preparing these documents, these people, the suspects, they were still on the territory of Ukraine.
Але поки йшов процес узгодження цих документів, кількість підозрюваних стала зменшуватись.
But while this approval process was going on, the number of suspects who are within Ukraine's boundaries has begun to shrink.
Навіть прийшлось садити літаки з підозрюваними на борту для того, щоб забезпечити здійснення правосуддя.
We even had to ground a plane that was already, leaving in order to make sure that the suspects have a prospect of facing justice.
Тому щодо тих підозрюваних, які зараз перебувають за межами України, звичайно, що ми будемо вживати всіх заходів щодо їх розшуку і в разі затримання їх екстрадиції.
So regarding those suspects who are currently not in Ukraine, we will be using all efforts to make sure that they are apprehended and that they are extradited.
Але я хотів би ще зазначити, що ми тільки на початковому етапі, тому що те, що оголошено, це тільки такі відносно невеликі епізоди з того, що розслідується детективами.
But I would also like to note that we are just in the initial stages of investigation because these counts on which they are being charged, they are still minor episodes in the whole story that had been going on.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have 6 remaining minutes. This is called Blitz Round at the Atlantic Council. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to direct it to a person, and please make your response really short and sweet. I think this question is for Dan Bilak. This is from Vladimir Lazunov. He says, as a foreign investor in Ukraine's renewable energy sector, our Canadian company entered into an agreement with Ukraine in good faith. We were proud to contribute to the diversification and sustainability of Ukraine's energy resources. But because Ukraine has not abided by the agreement, our company has lost and is still owed millions of dollars by the government of Ukraine. How can Ukraine expect international companies like ours to take its institutions seriously when such a situation is allowed to exist, and worse, when efforts to resolve the situation seem to be stymied by Ukraine's authorities? Dan?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. I feel their pain as I do all of the investors in the renewable energy sector. I worked with Vlad and his crew and others in facilitating investments, so I'm feeling it. I mean, this is not really a corruption issue, writ large. This is a policy issue, and we can debate whether it's a proper policy issue or not. I think it points to a lot of issues that Ukraine has in the electricity sector as a whole that need to be. This isn't just about the payments to solar or wind power developers. It's about how the system as a whole is supposed to work. And I would really love to see the government solve this problem because it does have an impact on investment views. I mean, when I was at Ukraine Invest, we over the course of 2.5 years, we unlocked over $3.5 billion of investment from existing investors based on people feeling that we were unblocking a lot of the regulatory and corruption problems. And so here we have a momentum going, and we have now a policy issue that is very problematic for investors, unfortunately.
Thanks, Dan. Another one for you. Sally Painter says, respecting international business agreements is critically important to the rule of law. Ukraine is backsliding on this with many of its foreign investors. How do we make this a priority for the Ukrainian leadership? I'll direct that to you and to Anastasia and Sergey. Go ahead, Dan.
It's a pretty general question. I'm not sure what, other than the one that Vlad raised, what other business agreements they're not doing. But governments repeatedly run into this issue. There are obviously there are mechanisms in Ukraine to solve these problems through the business ombudsman, through Ukraine Invest. The government in general has been very open in meeting with investors over the years. Go to your embassies. At the end of the day, if you can't solve the problem, Ukraine has bilateral investment treaties with many countries, and at the end of the day, it usually gets their attention. Unfortunately, fortunately, that doesn't take place very often. I don't know what particular issues Sally is referring to.
Okay, thank you. Anastasia, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah. So I think the rule of law is very important for our team. That's why President Zelenskyy, together with us and members of Commission of Legal Reform on behalf of President Zelenskyy, think about strategical field of the rule of law. And on March 1st this year, with All Ukrainian Forum, Ukrainian 30 Development of Justice was presented draft of the strategy of the development and judiciary and constitutional justice for 21-23 years. So the key points of the strategy is resume the activities of High Qualification Commission of the judges, which will allow in the near future starting the transparent and objective procedure for selection of judges and qualification assessment of the current judiciary of Ukraine. The second point is very important point. According to my view, it's improving the organization of the work of High Council of Justice. The need of renew the composition of the High Council of Justice with the effective involvement of international experts, as well to ensure that the members of High Council of Justice adhere to high standard of professional ethic and integrity is a priority. So the key point also is digital technology in the justice. It's very important, and it can be, and this will certainly be a guarantee of prevention of corruption in the judiciary. So this strategy also have the part of the prosecution reform, and now I can say thank you to Mr. Rabashapka for starting this very important step of reforming prosecution general. Now we have some questions on this issue, but anyway, our committee was done everything to give the general prosecution what they need to do the reform. And this last, it's very important, it's constitutional court. As you know, we have some deadly for anti-corruption reform the decision, and now we should think about reform on the constitutional court. Thank you.
Wonderful, Sergey. Last question. This one is for Ruslan Rybashapka. How do we reconcile Zelenskyy's dismissal of reformers in his cabinet and Smolly a year ago with more recent moves this year?
Look, nothing has changed in terms of president's entourage, or in terms of the parliament, or in terms of elites in Ukraine. The only things has changed is this is the new administration in the Washington. So I think that the only thing which reconciles these two opposite things is the new administration in Washington.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so very much. We very much enjoyed this conversation. I would like to thank Artem Sitnik, the head of NABO, for his time. Thank you so much, Artem. It was wonderful to see you. Thank you, Ruslan Rybashapka. Thank you, Nastya Radina. Thank you, Alexander Novikov. Thank you, Sergey Yanushis. Thank you, Dan Bilak. Your context was wonderful. I'd like to thank Miroslava Luzhinina for her brilliant interpretation as always. And I'd like to thank my colleagues, especially Andrew Denary at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to convening our community again very, very soon. Keep your eye on Ukraine Alert. Please contribute. Anastasia, Alexander, we always want to be hearing from you all. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you,
Until
Melinda,
then.
for meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.